Well, hello and a warm welcome back to the Andrew Eborn Show. And I'm joined again today by Catherine Blaiklock, the founder of the Brexit Party, in spite of what people may claim. It's all there on Company's House. And the breaking news that she's filed this police complaint against Nigel Farage with the Metropolitan Police. It's backed by 29 documents. We've been unpacking that. And we're starting to talk about the financial side. And you wanted to talk about going all the way back to Europe. Talk me through the allegations about the financial side.
Well, you saw what happened to Marine Le Pen, and this is not unusual. It seemed to be pretty wholesale what was going on in the EU with EU expenses. There are a number of things you can see if you Google. You can certainly see what happened to Paul Nuttall, who again now is back defending Nigel, even though he went through hell. There were two people who went through hell, which was Roger Helmer and Paul Nuttall, when they were in danger of losing their houses because of using EU money for purposes for which it was not intended. Nigel himself got a fine of 35,000 or had to pay back 35,000, but these were much larger amounts. We were talking in the hundreds of thousands. And the very interesting thing is that despite the hell that these people went through on the direction and sanctioning effectively of the party, which is run by Nigel, they are now back supporting Nigel again. And that I find quite extraordinary. So there's also many questions about money that was being run by a group by Laura Ferrari, who is now Nigel's mistress, and there's less information about this, but there was a lot of information about it at the time. I've forgotten what the name of the group was. It was one of these European groups for democracy and whatever. Um, but yeah, it was continual, these type of problems. And then there was the Douglas and Carswell problem, which was created by the fact that UKIP got 4 million votes, but one MP. And there's something called short money, which is related to the amount of votes. So it was a very large amount of money. And I believe that money is for very specific purposes. And Nigel, I believe, wanted to use it for purposes that were not those purposes. And so Douglas Carswell, who I think is a very upright person, objected. And that is the reason why they fell out. And well, or they did fall out very seriously. And then there was also, of course, the issue of the number of MEPs who started in one term and ended a term with UKIP. So Nigel would get 15 MEPs elected and only 5 would remain at the end of the term. Now, can you imagine this? Can you imagine if you got 200 MPs and you only end up with, or 150 MPs, you end up with 50 after one term? I mean, he's on quite good innings now. We are 9 months into 5 MPs and we've lost one. So we've lost 20% in 9 months, which on an annualized basis is 25%. So, but the historical is that you will lose 66% of your people. And many of those were arguments about expenses.
And it is very important. These, obviously, as we always say, are questions that should be unpacked. We raised, and every time you've been on, and we talked about the private eye, mentioning a figure of around 7 million. And
So that's FT,
sorry, what was that?
the Financial Times.
Yes, the FT, and I think others have repeated that sort of story. What do you think should? Where do you think that money is, and what questions should be asked?
Well, this relates to the entire structure of political parties, with all the parties, especially the smaller ones, having these great big unknown expenses. And it's like, well, in a political party, what should be unknown? I mean, what is it? You bought more billboards? You bought more leaflets? Paid more for an office? I mean, I mean, how can there be unknowns? This is sort of like not trade secrets. If I'm a small company, I don't have unknowns. So why the SNP in Scotland was very bad as well. And we know what's happened with their expenses. But if you look at that FT article, they had a very high percentage of black hole too. And now you look and oh, there's massive investigation into what went on with their funding. And what amazes me about this whole thing is that nobody seems interested in that £7 million black hole. And somebody should be interested, whether it's the Electoral Commission or Companies House. And of course, there's only subscribers, and they've changed now. We're not in the same party. So again, it's sort of slightly blurred. I mean, you asked why did they change the name? Well, maybe they changed it to move it again so that there were different people. But they've certainly done that in terms of people. They cut one group of people to get another group of people.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you're absolutely right. I always say that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and all we're doing here is asking the question, but also asking why others are not asking it. I mean, as you say, the FT picked up on it, various others, Private Eye have poked around it, and various others have mentioned it every now and again. But the media as a whole seems to have avoided it. Why do you think that is?
Because it's not very interesting.
Why wouldn't it
Because
be interesting if it's potential allegations of fraud or potential seeing what's happened elsewhere with other
all the
other
parties,
parties?
to some extent, all the parties are doing it. So every single party does it to some extent. It's the extent.
But to be clear, does what? Because there's a difference between turning around and saying, well, we've spent it on some extra posters or some cars or whatever, but we've spent it for party political purposes, as opposed to the implied suggestion, if you like, that it's being used for something which is not to do
I'm
with
not
the
implying.
party.
Well, nobody. The problem is we're not implying anything. We're just saying how can you have £7 million black hole? I mean, look, if it was £500,000, nobody would care. I mean, 7 million is an enormous number. That's a lot of paper clips.
Oh no, and you're absolutely. And during your time, have you any idea where that figure might have gone?
So, because this is way after me.
Right.
So, up to the point at which I was there was about 1 million. And then we were going into the EU elections, so there was lots of money needed to be spent. But and then I left, and there was still lots of money. But this is the money that occurred after I left in the end of April 19, and when I think they had £19 million of revenue. So again, it's a percentage issue. We are talking, it might have been less than that, 17. I think the number from recollection was something in the region of 35% of their money. And the Conservatives had maybe 15%. Labour had similar. And so, but the question is, why are all these parties allowed to do this?
Oh no, absolutely. And I think it shouldn't be a party political thing. It should be, as I say, sunlight is the best disinfectant. We need to ask those questions. If it's a 7 million black hole and as a percentage, it's a huge percentage. We need to ask why. And the same for every party. If there is a black hole, people deserve to know the reason.
Correct. There's no question about it. And there are always things with elections where, I mean, the only people who now could change this would be the Labour Party. But then the other parties don't want to get involved in it for obvious reasons with the Labour Party. So you start having electoral reform, and they might find that the electoral reform makes things even more difficult for them.
Yeah. So I think that the short answer is say it's speculation at the moment why there might be this black hole, but certainly it is right to question it.
Yes, and the FT was questioning it. The other issue is that these newspapers don't have a lot of funding for this sort of thing. I mean, the private eye is rather small now, I think. It's not particularly large. It's got quite an esoteric following, and it's all behind a paywall. So nobody can read it anyway.
Yeah. And it is so important. You're right. People need to do this, but they shouldn't have to be digging deep into it. It's a very legitimate question to any political party. If you have a black hole, explain it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, we'll continue asking those questions. I want to go back to Rupert Lowe and the narrative in the
Sorry,
media
can I
because,
finish on one point? The
yes,
question
please.
is, who do you ask to look at it?
Well, who would you ask?
Well, the irony seems that the Electoral Commission is really hot on looking at donations, but not completely cold on looking at what's it spent on.
But you've got
And
a lot of members, and that's the great thing about reform. They've got members like no other. It seems as though those members don't really have many rights, but they could quite legitimately say, "We've heard about this 7 million black hole. Is it right there's a 7 million black hole? And if so, why?"
but nothing will happen because nothing happens. You could write a letter. It's like these people who you write letters.
But then people will draw their own conclusions, and this is the
You
problem.
could
If you
write a
turn around,
letter.
if there's
I mean,
nothing to hide, don't hide it.
no, but I could write a letter to the Electoral Commission and Companies House, and I'll get a fob off if I get a reply.
But the fob off itself could speak volumes.
Well, maybe I should try.
Okay. Well, no, I would. There's, as I say, people got nothing to hide. You can ask it of all the parties to be consistent and say, look, why is there this black hole? There's a percentage, as you say, of the whole. It's larger with reform than it is for other parties. That's effectively what you're saying.
No, the Scottish National Party, as a percentage, was slightly larger than Reform. They were
Okay.
the two outstanding ones.
Right. Okay. And we know what happened there, and there are particular. And so it needs to go through the due process, as we say. It's not just important to ask the questions, but to question those answers. That needs to happen.
Well, I think so, yes.
Okay. I want to look at the narrative in the media because Nigel is an expert, another superb media, master media manipulator, rather like Trump, if you like. He can command those headlines. But as a result, he's got a platform, including on GB News, where he can respond to a lot of these things. He said about Rupert Lowe, he never even joined Reform. And he says that he's vetting candidates like never before. You founded the Brexit Party, even though people try to rubbish you about that and say what's not true. Well, we've seen on Companies House that it was true. Did he rewrite history with you too, calling you just an administrator fired for Islamophobia? And how do you fight that spin?
It's impossible to fight it. It's easier to fight it now after Rupert Lowe, but when not only is the left-wing media out for you, but then you've got sort of blackouts on the right, you can't respond. There's no way to respond. I wrote to Ofcom at one point about it. Got nowhere with Ofcom.
What did Ofcom say?
Nothing. I can't remember. But again, you get one of these fob offs.
But just to be clear, as I say, you weren't just an administrator because, as you say, you set the
Well,
whole thing up. That's very clear from Companies House.
and well, no, I'm the Electoral Commission as much as anything. I put it through the Electoral Commission.
And
I
how do you feel about that sort of denigration of your work?
That actually doesn't bother me. What bothers me is the fact that the country is in such a mess and there are so many people who can't help. People like myself and Rupert and Carl Benjamin and all his team and so many others in small parties have no ability to write articles that get seen, no ability to win any elections, no ability to say anything effectively except to a few Twitter followers.
Yeah, and actually, the last few interviews that we did, did get several thousand, and other people picked it up in the mainstream media, which we'll come on to in a bit. But
78.
you're right. You need to have, and as I say, it's asking those questions. It's making sure you've got a fair right of reply. And I always say that this is what you need. You need to sort of turn around. Trust comes in on foot and leaves on horseback. Trust in politicians, in the media, in the police is at an all-time low. The way you restore that is making sure that people have a platform.
Yeah, but there's platforms and platforms. I
Yeah.
mean, if the BBC, the Telegraph, the Times, the BBC exclude you, and I mean, most people are still getting their news from maybe a newspaper, maybe the BBC. So if you're completely excluded from the BBC, what can you do?
Yeah, and I think the important thing is to, as I say, if you've got balance, which is always try and do, let the general public reach their own conclusions. We talked about the questions to be asked, and we've talked about that, including about the 7 million and so on and so forth. Now, you claim, and just putting things into historical perspective again, you claim you could have sunk Nigel before the 2019 EU elections, but held back for Brexit's sake, and effectively that's why you say you gave up the shares. Here we are, 4 weeks from the local elections, where Reform's polling, I think, is about 26%. Why now? Are you sabotaging their shot, or you're saving it?
Look, local elections are meaningless. They were gloating, Reform were gloating about winning a local election on 45%. Let's get some numbers. 18% of those registered to vote voted in that election, and 25% of the population is not registered to vote. So the 18% then goes down to 12%, and they won 44% of 12%. They won on sub 6% of the population. And we will get 5,000 tweets about Reform won this thing. These local elections, if 18% of the 75% who are registered to vote, that tells you they are meaningless. People don't care anymore. They just can't be bothered. So uh, that's that. I could have done it before G24. I could have done it um, before the MEP elections. I could have done it anytime. But the thing is that we've now got Zia Youssef as a chair. We've got Rupert Lowe being expelled in the most heinous way. I mean, they're now saying yesterday that he tried to kill Yusuf. This was what went out in
Well, and
multiple.
this is why, and again, we were discussing this last night on James Wales' show. They've taken away Rupert's guns. Apparently, that might be part of the normal process for a harassment claim. But again, we need to unpack that because the media are spinning it that particular way.
It's horrifying. So yes, I know exactly why I've done it now. It's because of what they did to Rupert Lowe, and I can't stand to watch it.
And I think that that's the important point because people obviously it's going to cause the most damage in the lead up to these sort of side. But the police angle is huge. I mean, you want fraud charges, not just headlines. You said that the trust disappearance and the Companies House filings are illegal. What did your barrister tell you in 2019 that got you so sure this will stick?
Well, it's not just what the barrister said, it's what happened to the trust document afterwards and those private eye articles that it didn't get executed properly. That, in my opinion, is a lie.
Okay, and so we can continue looking at that. Now, Farage, he mentioned in March, it's fairly recent, a few weeks ago, that reform could collapse without him. You say he's the collapse. If the Met bins this, the 29 documents and all, does reform survive with him, or is it time for a new right-wing king?
I think we are losing our country with reform. I think we are going to get some incompetent, worse than Conservative Party, semi-Thatcherite mess, which has been voted by people who completely do not want Thatcherism. So the economics has no relationship to the people voting for reform. And I'll give you an example. I mean, the £2 million inheritance tax, as I said to Rupert, how many people in Great Yarmouth constituency or Boston and Skegness actually have £2 million of assets?
Well, and it's interesting because you're right, you're talking about Skegness, but now a lot of people are sort of property rich and cash poor. And you look at some houses in a number of the areas and they're crazy amounts. I mean, inheritance tax, so just as an aside, is a crazy tax. You work throughout your life to raise money, you pay tax on that money. And then when you die, you're expected to give over a huge chunk to the state again. Do you think it should be abolished?
I think the issue is the biggest issue is about getting people back to work and benefits, and particularly getting people. We have something like I can't remember the exact statistics, but they are horrifying. 20%, 25% of the population, and it was even higher in the under 24s. In the under 24s, it's like 30 or 40% have never worked or don't work. And whilst we're importing millions of unskilled people, we have this vast number of people who don't work. And I understand why they don't work, because it's just not economic for them to work. This issue is the killer issue. The inheritance tax issue is an issue whether you can afford it. I certainly agree with the real problem we have is the interchange between low paid workers and house prices, house rent, and benefits. And that particularly is the housing benefit, where effectively you need to earn over 25,000 for it to be worthwhile for you to work.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And these sort of key policies that need to be looked at and encouraging people, to giving people a purpose in life,
Well,
and encouraging them to work rather than distracting that sort of incentive.
well, I was just going to say on the inheritance tax, of course, most people don't pay it. So the poor don't pay it, and the very wealthy don't pay it because they have trusts, they give it away, and whatever. It's that very small sliver of people who are not particularly informed and don't have so many options that pay it.
Yeah, and last time I looked, I think the actual amount of revenue it raised is relatively small. It's about 7 billion, and we always talk about billions, but in political terms and otherwise, it's relatively small. But to continue to look at that, continue to ask the questions. Now, you've been at this for a number of years, Catherine, and the Electoral Commission chats, and now the police. Just to be really clear on this, what finally made you to say enough? I'm calling the law.
Oh, Rupert Lowe. I mean, saying that Rupert Lowe tried to kill Zia Yusuf. This is it's just outrageous. It's this is somebody who hasn't. I don't even know if he's had a parking fine.
So it's that criminalization. We've seen this, haven't we? Because we've seen the criminalization in places like Russia. We've seen the criminalization in places like France. The criminalization, if you like, the utilizing the police, the weaponizing of the police as to get rid of your political opponents or those who criticize you. It's a slippery slope, isn't it?
Well, the biggest slippery slope is the free speech laws of all, because what Rupert is saying about grooming gangs will not be allowed under the new Islamophobia laws. I mean, I am a free speech absolutist, in the American sense. And that's my other concern about reform, that they are absolutely not. They are a dictatorial non-free speech party. And how can you have a party that's supposed to be representing the opposite of Labour and you're doing exactly the same thing?
Yeah, and one of the dividing lines, the divisive figure, is Tommy Robinson, who is currently, as I understand it, in appalling conditions in solitary confinement. Whatever the rights and wrongs of why he's there, it seems quite apparent that it's appalling treatment, and there is that dividing line, isn't there, between Rupert's view of Tommy and Nigel's. What's your position?
Well, are you aware that Andrew Bridgen's gone to see him today? Do
And he's
you
allowed to go in on what conditions?
I don't have any update. I just saw it on Twitter and you mentioned it.
Right, because I know people like Lawrence Fox. I spoke to Ben Habib about it. I spoke to Anne Widdecombe about it. I mean, a number of people about Tommy Robinson and their views. But it's good that Andrew's managed to go. As I understand it, people have to sign all sorts of things before they can actually go, confirming they won't talk about it in social media. So it's interesting that even before he's gone in, he's going to talk about
I
it.
went to see him in Belmarsh in the last round in 2020.
How was
Which,
that visit?
well, what was extraordinary was what happened. I wrote an article for the Salisbury Review about it, how I was basically almost strip searched, and the woman in a burqa just put her ears back and wasn't searched. I mean, it was blatant. I was told to take my cardigan off, the airport sort of stuff, shoes, earrings, and she just literally lifted her hijab.
So it'd be interesting to, and Andrew's been on the show a number of times as well. It'd be interesting to hear about his side. But certainly, as I say, whatever the rights and wrongs, keeping somebody in solitary confinement for that length of time is wrong, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. But I mean, I think the more interesting thing is, why does Nigel Farage have this great vendetta against Tommy Robinson when effectively they're supposed to be on the same side?
Well, and
And
it's an interesting thing because they say he's not going to not welcome in the Reform Party and so his supporters, and there are many of those, have made it very clear he's never asked to be a member of the Reform Party.
um, yeah, but it's not just about being a member, it's much, much more than that. I mean, there's a video going around, and I can't substantiate it, but it's from somebody who was there, who does a lot of social media stuff, of Nigel very recently at the farmers' marches. And sadly, the voice is slightly, you can hear the rot word, but where somebody shouted, what about Tommy Robinson? And supposedly Farage said, let him rot. Have you seen that video or
I
heard of that
haven't
video?
seen that video, and again, as you say, it's
David
and
Banner.
nowadays we're questioning everything. And it's a very legitimate question. Did he say it? We put that directly to Nigel.
I can't confirm
Try
because
and get hold of that video and reference that. But
I
nowadays, as
can't
you know, we can
watch
fake
the video,
everything.
and it is a problem because you can't see the mouth at the point and where that was said, and there's two videos, in fact, from different angles, but can't comment on it. But the witnesses say that that happened.
Yeah. And Nigel's a seasoned public speaker. He knows that anything he say will get widely reported. So if that's a view he holds, then he could be asked about that and respond accordingly.
But if he's called Tommy Robinson calls the skinheads and thugs, it's the same thing, isn't it?
Well, no,
It's not
I
like,
think absolutely we have to hold everybody to account. And I say and this is the problem people make in the media. They all work out. They come. Well, a lot of people do. They come with their own petty prejudices. Their approach to any story is, well, I've got the conclusion, and therefore, how do I populate it with appropriate evidence?
well, I spoke to Michael Crick recently, who did the autobiography on Nigel, and who was always considered by UKIP, to be the, somebody you didn't want to get too involved with. But he, I would argue, is a liberal globalist. He's not. He's not in Labour anymore. He's more Lib Dem, really. But when I mention that I like Tommy Robinson, he gets a computer out and lists, well, look, he's got all these criminal records. And it's like, yeah. So, does that mean what he says about grooming gangs is wrong because he hit somebody in a car park? Are the two correlated? No.
And I think that's the important thing because look at what Tommy and his supporters have exposed, and you look at the tweets on a daily basis saying, look, let's question this and let's question that, and that is the concern at the moment. We always talk about freedom of speech, but freedom of speech has never been under any greater threat, has it?
Oh, I mean, you've seen what happened to the woman who's Alison Pearson. It's in the headlines. I mean, the same judge, I believe that there was a guy, an immigrant, who tried to dose or put petrol over people. I don't by the same judge, and he got a suspended sentence,
Yeah.
and she got 31 months and not allowed to see her children.
It is appalling, this so-called two-tiered system. We've had, as I say, putting a bit of balance on this. Charlie Mullins, who's a big Nigel supporter, he himself says that there have been threats to take away his OBE. He's now having tax investigations, which all he alleged are politically charged. So we need to call this out. If that is the case, we need to look at those sort of things. But going back to Nigel, and he's talked about purges in March, and now you've got a legal target on his back. What's his counterpunch? Is he going to sue you? Is he going to smear you? And are you ready for the Farage fight back?
He'll do all of those, or he may not sue me. Um, he threatens to sue people. He threatened, I believe, to sue Kemi Badenoch over the membership numbers. He's threatened to sue lots of people, but he doesn't actually do it.
So you
I
don't think
don't
he'll sue you?
I don't think he would want to sue me. And the reason he wouldn't want to sue me is because I've got so much, and I've got so much stuff that I can counter sue him on. Or, so much would come out in the suing process. It would be like, what these cases are like.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned that there are three people. You've only mentioned Nigel by name. Who are the other two?
I'm going to mention the other two here.
Okay.
They're not well-known figures. I will say one of them is it's not Richard Tice.
But
They're
one of
not
them's a well-known figure and the other's not.
sorry.
One of them's a well-known figure and the other's not.
Oh no, Nigel's well-known. The other two are not
That
well-known.
they're not okay. Well, that will come out in the fullness of time once things have gone through the process. Now, you mentioned beforehand about the difficulties you've had in filing this complaint, if you like. If the police pass and Nigel Crow's vindicated, what's next? Is it more legal ammo, or do you rally the public to finish him
Then I
off?
will separate the two parts and file the two parts separately.
And in
And,
what order would you do
and
that?
sorry,
In what order would you do that?
they'll be done at the same time. But the point is that because of where I was located, I couldn't put the documents online. So
Right.
there wasn't even room on the thing to put the documents as it happened. I had to spend a long time on the phone. So now I'm going to go and submit the documents physically.
Okay.
But we have talked about it this morning. I will submit the documents physically rather than attempt, because I couldn't do it online, and then I will see what happens then. And then if it's still rejected, I will separate it into two pieces.
Right. And finally, then, Catherine, as I say, it's always good to have you on the show to unpack these things, because, as you say, there's not a lot of traction in other parts of the media. What would you say to people who supported reform at this time?
You're being conned. You're going to get one of two, well, might get both of these. You're going to get a worse Conservative Party. The woman in Runcorn is completely a failed Conservative in every way, in her mannerisms, in her speech, in her dress. She's a Conservative. You're going to get a Conservative Party without the depth of knowledge, without the 175 MPs, without detail, without academics, and without the history. That's number one. And number two, if Nigel gets ill, they will deliver the first Muslim prime minister to this country. That's what you're going to get.
Okay. And the alternative?
The alternative right at this second, and I hate to have to say it, right this second, I think you'd have to vote Conservative.
Okay.
Because what you're going to get is a worse Conservative Party, a disorganized, hopeless, boys drinking club Conservative Party, but without 175 MPs, 2,000, 3,000 councillors, and 200 years of history.
Okay,
And
Catherine, you've been very clear on your views. I know, and thank you for approaching me in the very beginning.
I would say, obviously, that my hope will be that we will get a proper alliance of the right with Rupert Lowe and maybe Robert Jenrick before the next election. And that's, I certainly don't want to see, although I am seeing the rhetoric harden a little bit from the Conservative Party.
Okay,
I
and very
don't.
interesting, and Ben Habib's got very clear views on that as well. He talked about this UK pack, similar to what they have in the US, and we'll continue to unpack that. I know you'll be back on the show. Do keep me posted. But for now, Catherine, thank you very much for joining me.
No problem. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye bye. Bye.